So Ronnie, can you move over to that way a little bit?
Right here?
Yeah, that's better.
So
All
again, to
right,
So
you
begin,
Ronnie,
guys.
can you
Yep.
move over to
Can you hear me?
that way?
yes.
You guys are live. Right here? You guys are
Yeah.
live. You guys are live.
That's better.
Ready to go?
Mhm.
Good evening. What is love? Why do Black boys need to learn about love? Do you have tips and strategies on how to teach about love? All children need a trusted adult with whom they can talk to, confide in, and get their questions answered. Are you that somebody? Hello, friends, families, and supporters. I'm Dr. Sheila Fleming Hunter, founder and president of the Black Rose Foundation for Children. And we are honored to be here tonight as a host organization for the event. Welcome to Love Lessons, Black Men and Fathers teaching Black boys about love and emotions. This will be a virtual experience like no other. This event is a result of a collective effort by Fathers Incorporated, led by Mr. Kenny Braswell, University for Parents, Atlanta Cares Mentoring Movement, and Black Rose Foundation for Children. Originally conceived to occur in February, we decided to continue the love dialogue Fathers Incorporated began on February 11th with their Black Love Matters Town Hall. This event, like the former, features Dr. Armand Perry and his insightful learning about love of Black men and their relationships. This time, however, we wanted to go deeper into the discussion about love from a more practical and experiential perspective. So, participating along with Dr. Armand, Ms. Brenda Coleman, Executive Director of the University for Parents and Atlanta Cares Mentoring Movement, and Lars Wilborn, Outcomes and Virtual Collaborative Community Coordinator for Fathers Incorporated. You will hear from Lawrence, who feels he was not taught much about love, but somehow God's grace got him right, and he is in a happy and long term relationship. You will see a father, Ronnie Thomas, and his 6-year-old son, Trey, engage in a conversation about love. Since we all recognize that it takes a village to raise a child, you will witness a discussion about love with a mentor, Mr. Jamar Logan, with his 16 years old mentee, Eben Rogers. In the final analysis, we want to place Black boys at the center of a public discourse that will connect boys' upbringing and exposure to love, particularly with their fathers and other males. An expected outcome for this discussion is for fathers and other male role models to take seriously their role as love mentors for our boys and to empower them as well. We want to remind men that what they do not know about love can be dangerous for our boys. Connecting research to reality, this event was planned just for you. Enjoy, take notes, and act, all in the name of love. Welcome to Love Lessons, Black Men and Fathers, teaching Black boys about love and emotions. Now you will hear from our featured scholar, Dr. Ahmad.
Thank you, Dr. Sheila. That was a really, really stellar introduction, and I think set the stage for what it is that we want to get done today. I have the pleasure of talking with our attendees about a little bit of the work that we've done around this particular topic to create some context and to set a stage somewhat for the discussion and conversation that will ensue after that. So if you all will bear with me for just a second, I am going to share my screen and provide some slides that'll again, will be an attempt to set the stage for what it is that we're discussing on this occasion. If you will, someone give me a thumbs up to let me know if they can see the slides. Okay, cool. All right. So again, as Dr. Sheila mentioned, we're talking love lessons, Black men and fathers teaching Black boys about love and emotions. And so we want to do a couple things. One is we want to define love. We want to talk about why it's important for Black boys to learn about love. After that, we want to have an opportunity to hear from folks who are experts in this topic in terms of their own lived experiences, in terms of owning their own narratives, in terms of being open, willing, and receptive to share with us some of their perspectives and experiences so that we can have an opportunity to model what it is that they do well and learn from some of the things that maybe that they would have liked to have done differently or better. After that, we're going to have some discussion and conversation with practical tips and strategies about how it is and what it is that men should be teaching boys about love. And we're going to get an opportunity to hear from a really, really experienced practitioner, someone who's been in the field working with and around this particular topic for quite some time. After that, we'll engage in a Q&A, hoping that there'll be some interactive dialogue and discussion, and then we'll wrap things up. We're hoping to stick to right around an hour, so we'll see how we do with that. Now, what is love? What we're going to do here is we're going to share with you some of the major findings and major conclusions from 3 different pieces. The first one is from Dr. Sheila and her colleagues' book, I Am Love. And so a couple of things that we take away from I Am Love is questions about when is it appropriate for children to begin dating, right? And what, if anything, do parents and mentors do to prepare their children for dating? So some of the things that folks may at home may be thinking about is, again, depending on how old their children are, when is it okay? When is it appropriate for their kids to begin dating? And again, what is it that we do as parents or mentors to prepare them? Something that a lot of you all are probably wrestling with. I know many of us have wrestled with those issues, but it's a really, really important question and something that we want to have some discussion and conversation about. Beyond that, how is it that we define love? And obviously, when we're talking about love, love takes on a number of different forms. We could be talking love from the standpoint of familial love, that being the love that a father may have for a son. We may be talking about friends, the type of love that friends share with one another. And we may be talking about love from the standpoint of romantic relationships. But across all of those various forms of love, we feel it's important for young Black boys to receive intentional teaching and mentoring around what that should look like, how it should look, and so that rather than sort of being left to their own devices, they have opportunities to learn from trusted and positive adults in their lives, whether they be their parents or, again, in some cases, mentors, or maybe in other cases, both their parents and mentors, right? So again, when is it appropriate for kids to begin dating? How is it that we define love in all of its various forms? After we define love, the question then becomes, are we as adults comfortable with talking to them about love in all of its various forms? Some of us tend to shy away from these discussions for any number of reasons. And so one of the things we know is important, and I Am Love talks to us about that. It shares that with us. For those of you all who've read it and those of you all who haven't, it certainly would be worthwhile to pick up a copy. And you can get it anywhere books are sold, whether it be Amazon or other websites and things of that nature. But one of the things it delves into is us as adults being comfortable with talking with our children and those in our circles of influence about love in all of its various forms, and not shying away from those conversations and not dismissing children's curiosity around that, but indeed embracing those types of discussions and conversations. It's also important for us as adults and trusted figures in children's lives to be able to articulate our feelings and to teach them to do the same, right? Many of us have been socialized to sort of withhold our feelings and to not be emotionally demonstrative or expressive. And if and when that's the case, one of the unintended consequences there is we're necessarily teaching our children to do the same. And we're also teaching them that it's not okay to be whole human beings with a range of emotions. And so it's incumbent upon all of us to become adept at articulating our range of feelings and emotions with and for our children so that they have an opportunity to learn from us and how it is that they can go about doing the same thing. And then last here, we know that for all of these reasons, children need trusted adults with whom they can talk to, confide in, and get their questions answered. And as Dr. Sheila asked so poignantly, are you that somebody? Next, in continuing the discussion, the conversation around what is love, we pull from the text, Fatherhood in America, again, also available anywhere where you can get books. This is a book that is an edited volume, and it has, I think, maybe 16, 17 chapters in it. One of the chapters is a chapter that tackles the issues of fathers and sons and what is the role that fathers play in the lives of their sons. And so some of the things that we know from that chapter is that, unfortunately, fathers tend to talk less about sex than mothers. And oftentimes this is due to low reports of self-efficacy. Dads don't always feel confident about their ability to talk to their children about issues related to sex. It's also the case that dads tend to have lower expectations that if and when they talk to their children about sex, that they'll have positive outcomes. And so for these reasons, dads tend to be less likely or less willing to talk to their children about sex than their mothers. But again, one of the reasons we're here today is we know that men and fathers play a critical role in helping to shape the childhood and the developmental stages of all children. And as a consequence of that, it's important that dads take a more active role. And a part of that, taking an active role, is being more open, willing, and receptive to the idea of communicating with their children and with their proteges and mentees about issues related to dating, love, and even sex. We know from the research that contributed to fatherhood in America that fathers are also less willing to talk to their sons about sex than their daughters. And typically when they talk to their daughters, it's more about having them to make attempts to abstain from sex and being more sort of forceful and aggressive about their displeasure and disappointment if and when their daughters have engaged in sex at an early age. And so, again, we think it's important because fathers are needed by both their sons and their daughters, that dads be equally adept and equally open and willing to have conversations with both their sons and daughters, and not just from the standpoint of expressing disappointment if their children have had sex, but giving them useful information that they can use to help make some informed decisions rather than relying on other sources of information about how it is that they'll make those decisions. We know that research has found that several assumptions influence father sex education communication, and much of it has to do with fathers' concern that talking to their children about sex may threaten their children's innocence, that they, again, are not equipped to be able to respond to questions, that the children should drive those conversations by asking questions, and dads tend to take a passive role in waiting on children to come to them with questions. And we know that that may or may not ever happen. And then there's a school of research that suggests that dads are sometimes uncomfortable using anatomically correct language for body parts because they feel that it's inappropriate for children. But again, what we see oftentimes is that if children don't have, again, a trusted adult that they can go to and get good information, they end up relying upon or defaulting to places where they get misinformation. And those of you all who are familiar with the work of Fathers Incorporated, you know that one of their mantras is that dads play a unique and irreplaceable role in their children's lives. And as such, if dads aren't doing it, there's no way to guarantee that anybody else can. So again, for those reasons, we know it's incumbent upon dads to embrace those discussions and lean into them rather than shying away from them. Just a couple other pieces from Fatherhood in America. We know that when fathers do engage their sons in communication about sex and sexuality, more often than not, these discussions revolve around the son's puberty, and they tend to reinforce notions of hegemonic and sometimes even toxic masculinity. This is oftentimes the case because men tend to perceive their sons as a reflection of their own masculinity. So in some ways, what dads end up doing there is sort of living vicariously through their sons and doing things or talking with their sons in ways that are an attempt to reflect back to them how it is that they would like to see themselves as men, rather than having discussion and conversation that are specific to their sons' unique identities. And so, again, we want to be thoughtful and mindful of that, right? That our children are different people than we are, and the children are different people than we were when we were that age. And as such, we need to tailor our discussion, tailor our communication to meet the unique needs and personalities of our children, and not just trying to, again, reflect back to us whoever it is we think we should be or would have liked to have been at that age. Finally here, and this is a key point, I think, for folks at home listening and paying attention, is that in many families, socialization patterns prescribe that fathers mask emotions, put on a cool pose, as it's known, and sort of shy away from or dismiss or deflect away from expressing emotions that can be perceived as vulnerable or things that they feel as though show weakness. As a consequence of this, we sometimes leave our son with only examples of us in aggressive and angry postures. that can be damaging because, again, boys need to be exposed to a full range of their father's emotions so they know that they have permission to be whole human beings. One other study that we wanted to share some results with you from was a study by Dr. Tara Hurt and a couple of her colleagues. And in this study, she explored Black men's observations about the ways in which their fathers taught them about being a husband. And there were 52 married Black men who had a range of biological, non-resident, and social fathers that they were reflecting on in terms of their observations and their experiences with wrestling with or responding to 3 different questions about what it was that they learned about marriage from their fathers or their father figures. The results revealed that 24 of the men had positive role models, 12 of them had what they described as bad role models, and there were others who were somewhere in the middle. Well, we know from that study that the men talked specifically and explicitly about having had for them modeled issues related to trust and commitment, the management of conflict, being a protector or being a provider, as well as displaying teamwork, showing love and affection, and also imparting beliefs and values. And in the conclusion of this study, we know that the author stated or recommended that the article did a really, really good job of showing how important it is for Black men to become knowledgeable about the expression of emotions and feelings, and also the teaching of things like love and marriage and commitment and romantic relationships, because men play a really, really influential role in shaping their sons' development. And so I think in some ways that is a good segue as I stop here in terms of screen sharing. And we turn things over to Lawrence Wilbon, who will talk with us about some of his experiences in terms of modeling things of that nature within the context of love and romantic relationships.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. So, Lawrence Wilbon, again, I'm with Fathers Incorporated, and I actually get to have the opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about my personal experience as it pertains to love, growing through as a young man. So, I was a young man that grew up in a house with a mother, when my father was not present in the home. And my mother would share often, different jewels about being a responsible person, caring for one another, and she would show me the element of love as much as she could. But I realized that I still had a lack of and a need for someone to actually kind of impart more into me around this whole subject of love. And so, of course, just like many urban young men, we turn to the streets and we find individuals in the streets that will begin to share with us and be able to show us things of love. And so there was some experiences that I experienced because no one ever took the time to really walk through this whole love process with me. It wasn't until I went away to college where I began to still, what I first realized is that I had to love myself. Right. So that was one of the things I had to figure out. I had to love myself and not to allow just any kind of relationship to come and kind of detour me off of my path. But when I went to college, that's actually when I actually found what I consider real love. Right. I found an unconditional love in an individual that really showed me that I was okay to be me, and that she loved me regardless of who of those things that I may not were not able to bring completely to the relationship. And so, I've shared with some folks that I think that's when the real love kicked in, and that's when I was able to begin to start seeing that love, there were actions behind this love. It wasn't just lip service. There wasn't any harm done to me in this love. And And there are times, even because I wasn't really abreast on what real love was, there were times within our relationship that I was waiting for that one moment where it was, I got you. This is not true. Well, I'm happy to report 22 years later that we are still in love, and I'm able now to take what we've learned in our relationship, and now being able to impart that through modeling. I think that was one of the pieces, and through verbal expression, and share that with my own children. And so that is my journey to what I consider finding this true love in my relationship. First, I had to find out I love myself, and not to let any of those negative, somewhat toxic relationships kind of deter me. But then ultimately, when I actually fell in love and found the true love of my life, that actually allowed me to be able to see that there is actually real love out there. Thank you.
Absolutely, Lawrence. Thank you. And we appreciate you being so transparent. We appreciate you being so courageous as to share your story. We know that's not something that many of us have been socialized to do. So again, in terms of modeling, in terms of being open and leaning to some of these discussions, we appreciate you providing leadership in that way. What we like to do now is talk a little to our dads and mentors and sons and mentees. We know that, again, we've already sort of alluded to this, but I think it's important that we drive this point home, that there are very few relationships more sacred than that of the father-son relationship. We know that father-son bonding is incredibly important to a son's development for all of the reasons that we've already alluded to this early point in the program. We know that fathers have a major influence on their sons' lives, and sons tend to look up to their fathers for the best learning opportunities and lessons in and throughout their lives. We also know that it's true that very, very often when you hear and you talk to successful people, particularly successful men, they'll attribute a lot of their success to the mentors that they've had in their life. This is because mentors play a critical role in our growth and our development in terms of their ability to provide support, provide advice, reinforcement, constructive examples, and even friendship. And we know that all of those things are true for the boys that we come into contact with. And so for these reasons, again, not much different than dads, we know that mentors play a major role in shaping the lived experiences and the perspectives of the young people that they engage. And so what we like to do now is spend a couple minutes talking with a couple of Black men who serve in these roles as fathers and as mentors, and also talk to the young people that they're influencing about the way in which they are being intentional about shaping the people, the young people that they come into contact with around this particular topic of love in all of its forms. And so we're joined here now by Ronnie and by Jamar, as well as little Ronnie, if I can call him little Ronnie and Evan. And so first I have 3 questions for the men, and then what I'd like to do after that is then transition into a brief conversation with the younger men, the emerging men, to have them sort of to bring us home. So if I can start off with the men, and again, we don't have any sort of set order here, so whatever is fine with me in terms of who responds first. But I'd ask, when you were younger, what were you taught about love? Again, this is love in all of its forms in terms of father-son love, as well as from a romantic relationship perspective.
Yeah, so as a kid, I had a lot of indirect and direct lessons. Some of the things I think about when you ask that question, number one was just the respect, especially for women. That was one of my earliest lessons, making sure that I maintain and show respect for women.
Okay. What about you, Jamal?
Yeah. When I kind of reflect back on my childhood, I was, from a father-son perspective, very little from the direct relationship with my dad. My situation was somewhat similar to the Mr. Wilson mentioned earlier. My mother and father relationship, they were divorced when I was, very young. So young that I don't really remember my dad being in the same home. So for me, when I think about love, I think about processing it through either conversation, which there was very little of that, and then I think about observation, and there was a lot more from the observation vantage point that I observed with my father, how he, in terms of him being a caregiver for me, the way he treated me, the way he treated himself, particularly on those opportunities when I was able to, spend an extended amount of time with him. There were, time when I would able to go visit in the summer, or, I would maybe visit his mother on the weekends, and get a chance to see him during those weekends. So I learned a lot from him about love through the way he treated me, but not so much through, hey son, let's sit down and have a wrap at the table and let me tell you about these things. It wasn't, a whole lot of that.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing it. I think that's a sort of a common experience that as we talk to guys and we talk to men, that again, I think as you mentioned, it was the observation, it was the sort of the modeling that they learned from, but not a whole lot of intentional and thoughtful discussion and conversation around this particular topic. And so that's actually a segue to my second question. So based on those experiences, whatever they were, do you find it easy or do you find it challenging to express your love to the special people in your life?
Yeah, I think Jamal made a great point. It made me think too about, my mom and dad divorced when I was young. I was younger. However, my dad was still a very intricate part of my life. So there was a lot of those indirect observations of showing, seeing what love looked like in different ways. I had an uncle that would punch me in my chest. That was his way of saying he loved me, right? I had a grandmother that demonstrated love through her actions. I had a dad that would tell me that he loved me. So, growing up, that carried over to my adulthood. So it made it very easy for me as I became a father myself to show my love and to communicate that love. I think about when my dad died, because every conversation that we had on the phone, it ended with "I love you." It made his death a lot easier for me to deal with. So to say "I love you," to hug, to kiss, it's very easy. It became very easy for me to demonstrate into my adulthood, and as a father as well.
Awesome. What about you, Jamal?
Yeah, and I think Ronnie did a great job of kind of touching on the fact that there are other men. Well, in my case, there were other men, my uncles, cousins, grandparents, mentors, teachers, right? That I began to kind of formulate, what love would look like from relationships through the men in my life, right? Not necessarily just my father. Um, and that was very helpful. But it was challenging for me. Um, um, I had a challenging time, processing it and expressing myself. And I really didn't really begin to truly like investigate it until I was, well into adulthood. So it was challenging for me for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And my sense is certainly you aren't alone there. I think many of us wrestle with some of these issues, and I think as you mentioned, wrestle with them and well into adulthood. And so a sort of a follow-up is both you, Ronnie, and you, Jamar, when you think about whether it was easy or challenging, do you find it the same, right? Whether you're talking about love in the context of a familial relationship versus a romantic relationship, is it the same in your case, Ronnie, easy, and in your case, Jamar, challenging, or is it different based on the type of relationship or the nature of the relationship?
Yeah, for me, I would pretty say it was pretty much the same. You know, I, um, I tend to have a very outward personality, like type of person that kind of very social or
Mm-hmm.
sociable, very loving person, which can be a good and bad thing, right? Because everybody out there is not playing the same game, right? So you have opportunities where you may get burned by people, or you may be giving more of yourself to other people than they are willing to give in exchange. But I found in my journey, it's been pretty easy for me just to continue to be who I am and extend love to people and deal with them accordingly based on how they receive it.
Awesome.
Yeah, and is it okay if I
Yeah,
jump
absolutely.
right in? Yeah. So again, like I said, they were both challenging, but the romantic construct was a lot more challenging for me than I would say the family piece. Um, I had challenges with expressing myself. Well, I would say at least to the degree that may have been expected of me from who I was talking to.
Okay.
so
Yeah, yeah.
so so yeah, so I think the romantic piece was a lot more challenging for me in terms of basically expressing and meeting expectations, and I guess I would probably describe it more as me being willing to fully invest myself, I think, and be able to express
Hmm.
myself as well emotionally. Um, it was a lot more challenging for me on the romantic side.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, you certainly aren't alone there. I know that many of us wrestle with and struggle with that. And so again, I appreciate you being willing to be open and transparent in that way. So as we move the conversation forward, thinking about the totality of your experiences, what do you think for you, Ronnie, in terms of your son, and you, Jamar, in terms of your mentee, both of whom have been gracious enough to join us? What do you want to teach them about love? And how is it that you attempt to model those things?
Yeah, so like Brother Lawrence said earlier, right? I want him to have a strong sense of self. So, number one, loving himself first in the way that he sees himself. We have a little regimen that we go through, but we kiss the melanin, loving the skin that he's in, because I know the society is going to show so many negative images of that. So number one, make sure that he has a strong love for himself. I go out and buy flowers, and when I bring the flowers home, this is my delivery man. And what's the message that we say to your mom and your sisters? The man that loves him. You gotta tell people in the camera. The man that loves him. The man in their life, what? The man in their life loves him. Yeah, so just try to get him to like modeling, like just being able to express your love, starting with your mom and your sisters, giving them flowers, reminding them that the man in their life love them. As he grows older, want him to understand that everybody in the world isn't going to be like he is. We try to still not let that hold us back, because the world needs more love. We got enough of hate in the world. So I still want him to grow up to be a loving person, but hoping to be able to show him how to balance that, and how to be able to not overextend himself, and how to be able to draw back, still be open to communicate and demonstrate love, but to not make yourself too vulnerable to be taken advantage of.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And striking that balance is really, really interesting, and probably like walking a tightrope in a lot of ways. But my sense is little Ronnie is in good hands there with the coaching and the mentoring that he's receiving. He's well on his way. Yeah, that's good stuff. What are you thinking, Jamar?
Yeah, so the young people that I try to, help support in terms of being a mentor practitioner and all of that. One of the things that I try to convey is um, really just having a character centered view, um, of who you are and how to express yourself. I think I kind of think about character as kind of like a foundational building block to that love would be based on. You kind of need some of those things, that having a strong character, whether that be integrity, discipline, those kind of things. So helping young people to understand that those things are um, assets, if you will, that kind of undergird being able to love well, or being able to even envision love, right? So and then the other part of it, I think, that I try to convey to young people I work with is having courage. You know, um, to me, love is about, particularly when we start talking about, because a lot of it starts when you talk about the romantic piece of love, talking to young people, we use the word love, but a lot of the conversation is about things that aren't necessarily related to what the vision of love is. It's about, okay, how do I express myself when I'm dealing with, this person I'm interested in, for example, right? I'm wanting to convey to that young person, hey, have the courage to say that you really are interested, and just kind of like trying to break down some of those barriers where and try to create a comfort level where a person can just truly admit, okay, like really, what are your intentions? Like, what are you really trying to do? And so, I think character and courage are really important because, getting a person to open up and be courageous about, what their true intentions are really important. And then I think you can get to the love, right? Because then you start to formulate a vision for what it is, right? Yourself, through your own lens. And if you have those things that I talked about, what we term character often, I think that you'll be, well equipped to love and be able to express yourself. And then the last thing I think is just having a strong sense of duality, right? So, and that's tied to courage as well, right? So, not necessarily, leadership, but followership, not necessarily making all the right decisions, but the consequences of not making the right decisions, right? And then trying to help a young person to see that, that's a part of the construct, the duality of, quote unquote, right or wrong, right? Having the courage to express yourself, when you may have not made the right decision. And I think that helps a person to be able to love better if they have kind of those elements, because those things will help to sustain, I believe, a loving relationship, which I hope we all know isn't, always doing the right thing all the time. So those are the kind of the three main things I try to focus on.
Nice.
That's what's up. I appreciate you sharing that. So now if we can transition and talk to the young men, we've already had a cameo from Lil Ronnie, who I think has in many ways stolen the show, right? And I'm gonna be picking up some of that where Lil Ronnie was putting down myself, try to put some of that in my repertoire. Um, but if I could just briefly ask, and I'll ask you, Lil Ronnie, because I think one of these questions is maybe for you, and then I'll direct the other two at Brother Even. Lil Ronnie, if you will, talk to us a little bit about how your dad shows you love.
Hugs and kisses,
Hugs and kisses. How does that make you feel?
happy and safe.
Listen, so first of all, Lil Ronnie is going to be out here teaching my classes next semester. That's what's up. Lil Ronnie, we appreciate you, man.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Evan, if you will. First of all, am I pronouncing that correctly? Is it Evan or Eben?
It's Eben. You got it.
Evan, how are you tonight?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Talk to us a little bit about how your mentor shows you love and how that makes you feel.
The way love is shown towards me, it's shown in a plethora of ways. I have love by touch. I have love by showing. Love by example. There are plenty of ways I receive love, and what I mean by that is either giving me a hug, or when I'm down and I need help, they're there for me, whether it's financially or just emotionally. So those are some ways that I receive love.
Awesome. What do you think boys your age need to know about love?
One thing that I would dish out would be that love is a commitment, more than anything. To choose to love somebody, to choose to be there for them 10 out of 10 times any hour of the day is most important. To know that they have your loyalty and you have theirs, very important to me.
Last question. What advice would you give to fathers and mentors out there about how they should teach their sons and proteges about love?
Teach them the way that you wish you were taught. Everyone grows up, everyone has different experiences and examples and the ways that they've been shown love. Teach your proteges, your children, whoever you love, teach them the way that you wish you were loved.
Very, very insightful. Listen, I could not be more encouraged. The last two voices we heard, I think in so many ways, fill up my spirit and give me so much encouragement about where it is we as a people and as a community are going. If we could take whatever it is that you two have and bottle that and start making everybody drink it or put it in these vaccines that they out here doing, I think we'll be doing just fine. I really appreciate both of you. I appreciate all of you all. Special shout out to our young men, but obviously both you, Ryan, both you and you, Jamar, as well. I appreciate you all coming on and blessing us and uplifting this topic and sharing with us your experiences and dropping these nuggets and these jewels on us. This has been exactly what I think it is that folks need. Coach Lynn, you're up. Talk to us a little bit about some of the practical and tangible things that folks can do at home in terms of coaching up the young people around them about the topic of love.
Okay. Well, I want to. Everybody said some things that kind of was, accumulating in my head. Let me start off with saying the most important person in the life of the child is the same-sex parent, for modeling, for prototype, for imprinting. I remember, seeing my grandfather was the man in my life, and he modeled for me, the things that I practice to this very day. Love is usually, for a lot of men, a lot of male children, love is an acquired taste. You have to watch somebody do it, and you kind of, put it into practice a little bit. So a boy child needs to see a man love his mama in terms of how to be in a relationship, in terms of whether the parameters of the relationship, those kinds of things. It really helps. However, only 86% of Black boys grow up with a father in the house. So the attributes of love are things that you have to acquire. It's kind of like an acquired taste. So one of the things we can do is when I'm talking to a lot of my male who are in relationship, is the practice of vertical intimacy. And vertical intimacy is how well do you get along on your feet? So for Black males, don't get a lot of vertical intimacy. We buy rims or we buy clothes, and for that little 15 seconds of, oh man, look at those rims, about $3,500 worth of rims for a 27-year-old car, had nothing to do with the car or the rims, but that 15, 20 seconds of validation and praise and acknowledgement that we get. So the practice of vertical intimacy is kind of like love languages: time, touch, affirmation, gifts, and service. Those are vertical intimacies that men can practice, especially mentors to mentees. Everything you do for your mentee, you kind of heal it in yourself. So if you grew up in, it wasn't the most ideal conditions, you can model for your mentee those things that weren't modeled for you. And that way you can kind of start the process of healing those wounds in yourself. Learning how to love yourself is huge. Because if I don't know how to love myself, I'll make you take care of me. So there are a couple of pillars to loving yourself, and I don't know if I have a whole bunch of time. Part of loving yourself is the ability to say no. A lot of times, we have, because as a lot of times as males, we feel obligated to kind of help everybody and help every person. And we lose the way of saying no, because no kind of sets a boundary. Boundaries let people know how you want to be treated. And so no goes along with boundaries. The second thing I would talk about is that how you should put yourself first. It's okay to say no, but it's also okay because you don't want to drain yourself of, you know, the love that you can give to everybody else, because you need to save some of that love for yourself, because every man has an emotional bank account, and the amount of love that goes in it will fill it up, and the amount that drains from it will empty it. So it's up to you to maintain that emotional bank accounts, not just for everybody else, but, you know, so that you can be able to reach in and get some of that love for yourself. It's really important. So that's kind of like the very condensed version of, you know, how to love yourself and the practice of vertical intimacy. It's very important.
Thank you so much. If you will, tell us real quick how it is that people can get a hold of you even beyond this discussion.
Marriagefamilyclinic.com is my website, and I'm a psychologist, so I see couples, individuals, and families to help them to discover these vertical intimacies amongst themselves and amongst each other. And marriagefamilyclinic.com. And I do online, you know, just like we do here. And we just go through, I coach folks on how to be in a relationship. Because if a relationship wasn't modeled for me, then I got my ideas from peer groups, TV, family, friends. And some of those are misconceived images to kind of plant in my mind about what love is, especially if love wasn't modeled for me. So I kind of walk folks through, you know, especially if you didn't have it, you know, that vertical intimacy from another man. It's real important for a boy child to get that vertical intimacy from another man. That's why I always said the same-sex parent is probably the most important person in the life of that child, because he needs to see it. So like for me, that would be my grandfather. I remember him tying my tie. You know, I remember smelling his cologne. I remember the haircut, you know, all those things that got planted in my mind at an early age, I now do on my own because it was modeled for me. And those are vertical intimacies. So what I help clients to do is discover those vertical intimacies and to practice them, put those into practice.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So real quick, we want to get into a Q&A in the little time that we have left, but I want to draw your attention to some of the things that are happening in the chat, right? So people are just sort of dropping some of the highlights. And the first one is, again, if you've not picked up a copy of I Am Love, you need to hit Amazon up as soon as you get off of this telecast and go and get that. I mean, it's a must read, I think, is what we're being told in the chat. And as a person who has read it recently and used it to help inform this discussion, I certainly would agree. Lil Ronnie in his quote, right? Daddy shows me love by hugs and kisses, and it makes me feel safe, right? Like, I mean, just think about how much depth there is to that one comment, particularly against the backdrop of, think about how many men you know, like grown men who struggle with intimacy, and largely it's because they don't feel like they have safe places and spaces to be open, vulnerable, and expressive with. And here it is, we have Lil Ronnie, who has already sort of mastered that competency because of the environment that's being cultivated for him. Like that's we cannot leave this space without thinking about how important and how critical that is. Even mentioned that love is a commitment, right? And again, I mean, so these are words from my youth, but there's so much wisdom in it, right? And so it's a testament not only to the young people, but certainly to the older people who are shaping them. And then Ms. Brenda, you mentioned again, love is loyalty and love is courage. And I mean, nothing could be more true than that. So again, so we appreciate all of that. In the time that we have left, what thoughts or what questions, what comments do people who are taking all of this in whatever parts of the world, what are you thinking about? What's on your mind? What reactions do you have? What have been your impressions? What questions might you have for anyone who's been on program to this point? And while we're doing that, Coach Lynn has put his website in the chat too. That's marriagefamilyclinic.com.
I see Dr. Lynn Anidi.
Can you hear me, Armand?
Yep. Go ahead, Kenny.
Yeah, you're gonna just hear my voice. But I wanted to add this as a comment. It was something that Ronnie said earlier, and it just struck me because phrases just strike me when I hear them as something that has the ability to live beyond this. But it also struck me in a way that it lends to this necessity and criticalness to extend this conversation. And the phrase he used was "kiss the melanin," right? And when he said that, I was like, "Whoa!" Like, kiss the melanin. That's this whole notion of self-love. Like, how can we possibly speak to our children about loving others if we don't spend the kind of time that we need to speak to them about loving themselves? And that's not just for me, it's a Black people thing, right? Because we can get so caught up right now in what in the empowerment of Black women, the empowerment of Black men, and we get caught up in the social justice conversation and all of those kinds of things. At the end of the day, the real issue is how do we as a community come together as a people to begin to model more seriously this whole notion of self-love?
Yeah, I appreciate you. Yeah, bringing that back to our attention. Yeah, I was struck by "kiss the melanin" as well. I was taking a mental note of that too. Right. I'll quote you when I use it, Ronnie. But be very clear. I will be adopting that and using it quite widely and liberally. So yeah. So that was a whole word, I think, as the young people say. Yeah, absolutely. We have in the chat, and this is from Dr. Lynn Anity, it looks like.
Anidi.
Anidi, I'm sorry. Anidi. So you can see that too, Ms. Brenda?
Yes, she's my colleague. Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, and so yeah, well, I'll let you do the honors then, if you will. Go for it.
Okay. So Lynn, your question was that how using open-ended questions does provide opportunities for men to be more transparent. I wanted the other Lynn to elaborate on that, and Dr. Perry as well.
You mean open-ended questions? What depends on what when you say open-ended questions, what are we pursuing? Is it love? Is it friendship? Is it what are we talking about?
My perception is it's all about the love.
Okay. Well, with regards to relationships, yeah, open-ended questions is critical in terms of the pursuit of a relationship. However, you have to be in the right context. Yeah, open-ended questions help. I think that you have to be careful. It depends on what stage you are in the relationship. If it's the initial, you don't want to pursue any really heavy questions. You kind of want to feel a person's energy. I always tell people to, once you know how to love yourself, it changes your perspective. You're no longer attracted to, what you used to be attracted to. And the theory says we're attracted to people who remind us of the parent that gave us the hardest time. So if you're going down that track, once you start to love yourself, you're no longer chasing a parent, which is probably why the divorce rate's over 50%, because we married somebody that's in that same frequency or the energy of that parent that gave us a really hard time. Mm-hmm. So those questions have to be really, thought. And I have a list of questions, first date questions you can take on a date. So, but yeah, it's important.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So it's interesting, right? As I reflect on it, and the idea of being asked open-ended questions. And I should also say, if I'm being transparent, I don't know that I had a whole lot of good modeling around this particular topic either. And so, and if you talk to, well, I know if you talk to my wife, she could have written a book on some of the challenges that I may present to her in this particular area. And she's mentioned to me a time or two that I think the way that she frames it is I tend to be selfish with my feelings. I think is the way that she puts it. And in whatever sort of reflection work that I've done, it may indeed be that I have some sort of deficiency in terms of my level of comfort in being expressive and demonstrative and so on and so forth. And so anyway, so I'm saying all that to say that back to the question about open-ended questions, if I could get away with giving folks 1 or 2 word answers, particularly if the topic is related to how I feel, I'd be as happy as a pig in slop, right? But if you really wanted to get some depth out of me, then you would necessarily need to ask open-ended questions, because if left to my own devices, no, I would be just fine with a yes, no, and keep it moving. You know what I mean? So, but as I get older, I'm working on recognizing that necessarily I need to be more introspective and more open, willing, and receptive to the idea of sharing what's going on inside, whether I'm being asked or not. You know what I mean? So anyway, so that's a 5-minute answer to a 30-second question. But for me, yeah, like if you're looking to get anything out of me, open-ended would be the way to go. Absolutely.
Well, I mean, but a lot of us are still in survivor mode. So if I haven't come out of survival mode, I stay in my head. And part of what my process is to kind of get you to come out of your head, to kind of look around to see that there are some other possibilities. But a lot of us are survivors of our families. And so how I learned to survive was, kind of quiet, observe, kind of wait for the other shoe to drop. That kind of paranoia. If I bring that into a relation, I'll look for a woman who will allow me to play that role unconsciously until I can get off of autopilot. So being a survivor of such is a major league thing that you have to find out in background. But it's kind of a hard question to ask on a date, unless you feel that kind of vibration and frequency and energy that this is going to go beyond us kind of initial date. So yeah, finding out background about a person is absolutely critical before you can even entertain going into a relationship.
Yeah, this is Jamar. I would like to offer some comments on this as well, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there are a few things I think that come to mind. Open-ended questions are important, but as the doctor just said, context matters. But there are some other things that I think that are important as well, particularly as it relates to men, having challenges, or young men having challenges with this. And one thing is the notion of empathy, right? So being able to be empathetic, being able to reveal your thought process, right, on an issue, I think is really key. And it's not just key for the young man, right? Because we are, evolving as men, and we're growing, right? Even though we're in adulthood, right? So, that's one thing I think that's very important. And then the other thing I think about that Trey, I smile when Trey did such a great job of kind of expressing himself and articulating his feelings. Is the notion of language, right? So depending on who you're talking to, a lot of times we as men don't have the language to express ourselves. And when I say don't have the language, we really do have it. We just might not have that particular term that that person is looking for us, to give them, right? But in terms of the core sense of the feeling itself, we have that, but sometimes we don't have the language. And so as we grow and evolve, we get better at that. So I think that that's a important thing to point out to anybody who's trying to grow, is that you do have it, but you just might not have the language.
Amon, I wanted to try to bring in Eben again because he's a 16-year-old and he probably needs some words of wisdom, or he might have heard some. So Eben, I'm going to put you on the spot to hear some comments about what you've heard. It could be from kissing the skin to the open-ended, but I'm just curious to know, with this conversation, what has inspired you, or you learned, or would like to learn or know, given the discussion about love and emotions.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. One thing, I really admire Ronnie is teaching Trey to show his emotions. I know as men, we sort of shy away from showing our emotions, especially towards other men. But the ways Trey is able to say that, I'm able to kiss my dad, I'm able to hug my dad. I feel like that move mountains to me, because that's not something you see every day whatsoever. It's very important. As well as kissing the melon. I'm stealing that from you too. That's very smart, very good. It's very important to love yourself, especially if you want to go on to love other people, you have to love yourself first. 100%, of course.
Yes, and I would just like to add that I am so moved to see all of you men just being so open and transparent. A lot of men have difficulty with that. And I think that's so important. That's a crucial step in terms of developing a loving relationship.
Absolutely. I would echo all of those things. It looks like we are right at the 8 o'clock hour, and so that is indeed our time. I imagine that we could easily go on for another hour, maybe even 2 or 3, but it may just mean that we have to come back and do a part 2. So before we go, I'd like to again thank all of my colleagues, and if I can go on my little Zoom square, that's Lawrence Wilbon, that's Miss Brenda, that's Dr. Sheila, Big and Little Ronnie, even Coach Lynn and my man Jamar, and then of course, special thanks to Kenneth Braswell and the whole crew at Falls Incorporated for helping put the production on. My name is Armand Perry, and this has been Love Lessons. We're talking about the role that Black men play in teaching Black boys about love. We appreciate you, and we appreciate your time. Thank you.